Hi everyone, number one Marmaduke fan here. I searched to see if anyone did this one and no one's done it, so what the heck. Phoenix Bizarre Adventures is a Marvel True Believers. These are $1 comics Marvel puts out to pump up some of its older series, and this was done to, I think, get people pumped for the Phoenix Resurrection book where they're going to bring the old Jean Grey back. And Bizarre Adventures, at least according to my local comic book shop owner, was a weird little black and white magazine, Marvel Punished. And he claimed this is the first time this story has been published in color. It's written by Chris Claremont, who sometimes gets roasted for being a little verbose, and I definitely saw that in some of the paragraphs of text. Penciler's my boy, John Buscema, the legendary artist behind How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. Inker is Klaus Janson, and I will occasionally see little textures of halftone, which look like shading done for a black and white magazine with color laid on top of it. And there will be times like this panel where I won't know what it looked like in black and white. Like I'm guessing maybe that was white or off-white, and then it was shades of gray to a dark gray. But I don't know how they could have finagled going from black and white to these sort of color washes. So I'm really interested to maybe go try and find the original Bizarre Adventures now, because I don't know about you, but I've never heard of it. A very appropriate name, a bizarre part of Marvel's history. But the story is a really sweet little mix of a character moment plus an adventure story. So we're going to do a little storybook time, but I'll make artistic comments as I go. So Jean Grey, formerly Marvel Girl, then she became the Phoenix, and in the very famous series, the Dark Phoenix Saga, she dies because the Phoenix became evil, and she had to stop the Dark Phoenix from destroying all life by sacrificing herself. So Jean's older sister, Sarah, has come to visit Jean's grave. She kind of, through the dialogue, we're recapped on what's happened in the past, how Jean Grey isn't really buried there. She died in space. Essentially, she had to atomize herself to stop the Phoenix from destroying the world. But Sarah still feels like she can feel Jean Grey's presence there, and she looks back on a past time. Now, this whole little interaction reminded me of my least favorite comic book of the year, Spider-Gwen number 23. I think written and drawn by Hannah Blumenreich, which is essentially a fantasy about how wonderful it would be to punch a straight white male right in the face, knock him out, and leave him for dead. And I thought about whether this annoyed me or not, and I decided it didn't annoy me, even though there's a similar theme of these two guys. They're hitting on Jean and her sister. They're kind of being somewhat sophisticated in how they ask them out. But then Jean reads his mind and sees that he's thinking dirty thoughts about her. So even though he's being polite in his words, he's thinking dirty thoughts, and she uses her telekinesis to sort of knock him off the bridge like he slipped. Whoops, and then everybody laughed. So on the surface, this is a similar thing. The Spider-Gwen story was a straight white male hitting on a girl, and she brushed him off. And then bizarrely, he started getting violent and angry, like he was a privileged white male. And then Mary Jane beat the snot out of him, knocked him out. They left him for dead. And then for the rest of the comic, everybody was sort of chirping and chuckling about how awesome Mary Jane was to punch this guy out and leave him for dead. This makes much more sense, even though it's a similar thing, because Jean Grey is kind of reacting a bit impulsively because she sees what he's thinking. She's not focusing on what he's saying, she's seeing what he's thinking. And she doesn't beat the snot out of him and leave him for dead. She essentially pulls a prank, a prank on him. Spider-Man would probably do something like this to Flash Thompson once in a while. He'd like web him up, and then Flash Thompson would trip, and that would be Peter Parker's way of getting a little bit of revenge on Flash Thompson. And then Sarah remarks that she thought that was a little bit harsh, and she thought that he was being rather gallant, and then Jean has to explain herself. So Sarah doesn't quite have the same perspective that Jean does. Jean's a little bit more of a feisty, violent X-Men. Sarah's a little bit more demure and more tolerant of boys being boys. So this is a first wave feminist message. It's not like a creepy, weird, violent third wave feminist message, which makes it more tolerable in the context of a story. It makes more sense for a heroic adventure action girl, Jean Grey, to be a little bit more feisty in how she treats men, but that's not every single character. And she doesn't do something that's kind of violent and nasty. And boy, John Buscema draws beautiful women. They're knocked out by some knockout gas, and Jean, beautifully, gracefully falls off and sinks into the below. It gives us a reminder of her past as a tomboy and how her powers were essentially awakened by becoming sort of psychically linked with her dying friend. So Jean had this traumatic experience as a child, which Charles Xavier had to help her work through and help her kind of realize her full potential as a telekinetic. And then it kind of gives you the recap of the Phoenix Saga, and Jean Grey awakens underwater, and she's blue, and she's in this sort of hot John Carter of Mars, Dejah Thoris, Princess Leia style outfit, and she remarks on this, and she goes to see her sister, and her sister's freaking out because Jean Grey's used to going on crazy adventures with the X-Men, but for Sarah, who's a normal woman, this is very traumatic, and they find out that they are going to be brides of the chief, and the chief is Atuma, the enemy of Namor. So he's like I guess he's Marvel's version of Black Manta. He's the underwater bad guy, and his plan is to breed a race of superhumans. Apparently, because if mermen mate with Earth surface women, then they produce like these super babies, and he's going to kind of breed a race of super beings to help them take over the surface world. And what's noteworthy about this is he's a sexist. He's a male chauvinist pig sexist who views women as objects, as lesser, and as purely for breeding. And again, this first wave feminist message works because he's a villain who wants to take over planet Earth, and that view of women makes sense with this sort of medieval Genghis Khan conqueror type of character. Genghis Khan was a historical guy who would just go from town to town, burning, pillaging, and raping. And that's what he did. He wanted to conquer, he wanted to break stuff, take over things, and enjoy the fruits of his conquest. So for a character like that, it makes sense for them to have that sort of an attitude. They're not just projecting this onto Republicans or conservatives. They're not pretending that people they don't like are evil, sexist bigots. They're portraying a villain with a Genghis Khan mentality as a sexist to add a little dimension to his fight with Jean Grey. And Jean Grey observes that he's saying some of this stuff to goad her. So he's saying if I want to, I could turn you into a vegetable, Jean Grey. But then thought is not essential to bearing children, and he's doing subtle gestures to show what a controlling, evil person he is. Condescendingly grabbing the cheek like Sarah's a child. And then Jean figures, well, this would have worked when I was just Marvel Girl, but I'm the Phoenix now, and I've taken a level in badass, and now she's super strong. So she unlocks her Phoenix powers, and she starts blowing up all this stuff. Atuma is so strong, even in her Phoenix form, he can almost stab her, but then with the force of her mind, she blasts him back, and off she and Sarah go. That's not a very good face, John Buscema. But boy, this art is dope. Look at everything. Like when Atuma is falling over and there's a bunch of wood on him, there's this nice graceful bend to his legs and his arms being akimbo, and the wood, even like the little chunks of wood that have fallen over, they're pointing in interesting directions. They've got a nice movement to them. Things are composed. They're not just slapped on. Atuma threatens them that soon they'll be back, and they'll come back of their own free will and submit. So the theme of Atuma being a traditional, male chauvinist pig, and them being first wave feminists is reinforced as they say their goodbye. And then they find out what he meant was that there's no way for them to escape because she's been turned into a mermaid creature. She can't breathe out of the water now. And poor Sarah, we're given a humanizing moment where we kind of it's calm, we sit down, we talk about it, and Sarah wants to go home. If she was single, maybe she'd be okay with this fate, but she has a husband and she has children, and she doesn't want to abandon those responsibilities. So Phoenix thinks and realizes that if she can change herself, she might be able to change Sarah, but there's a risk to Sarah's life. They could both die because Jean essentially has to connect with Sarah almost on like a psychic, emotional level. They're going to unite in their minds and heal what's been done to Sarah. And on an atomic level, Phoenix undoes the damage to Sarah's body, and Sarah returns. And then she sees that Jean's in trouble and gives her mouth to mouth. Coolio. And I like this little scene of them sitting by the fire. The colorist has added a lot, I think. If my comic book store owner was correct, and this is the first time it's been printed in color, the color is simple, it's straightforward, it's punchy. I can see how in the text they were saying things like, my skin is blue, your skin is back to normal, as a way of cueing you to what happened to their skin without the advantage of having color. But this simple little coloring style is punchy and it's effective. They're not trying to sketch out a bunch of stuff, except for the little gray, which is probably a leftover from when it was published in black and white format. I think that's all I'm going to show, because it ends with Sarah going to visit Professor Xavier and remembering her time with Jean Grey, and this was a healing moment for them. They were kind of arguing at first because Sarah was scared of her children being mutants like Jean, and Jean took personal offense at that. Yet after this kind of heroic adventure and this bonding experience, it's like they were closer, but Jean decided to suppress Sarah's memory because she thought Sarah couldn't handle it. And when Jean died, then Sarah regained her memories, and her memories of Jean being the Phoenix. So she wishes her sister hadn't done that to her. So Claremont does all this through kind of like a big text dump, so it's lots of paragraphs of reading. And there were a few times where I found myself kind of going la-di-da-di-da. Let's just look at the pretty pictures. But a fun adventure, and for $1, go get this, guys. This is a fun little bit of the character's history. It's a fun little adventure, and it is both a fun adventure and a neat little character moment. A good first-wave feminist story. I'm #1 Marmaduke fan. I love you guys. Catch you later.